Hello, I'm Emily.
And I'm Kate, and we're from Chirulio. Welcome to episode 5 of Burying the Dead Behind the Scenes.
We're joined today by costume designer Hannah Pearson to chat about the show. Hi Hannah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So, we're here to chat a little bit about Burying the Dead. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about you and how you got into costume making.
Well, I'm a dressmaker and costumier, and I have always loved costume. As soon as I realised that I could make the gorgeous clothes that I saw in films, that was it. So I studied costume design for film and theatre at Wimbledon College of Art, and got my honours degree there. And then I've worked in the industry on and off since then, as well as bridal wear.
And how did you go about researching the costumes for Burying the Dead?
Well, I have a wonderful library of history of costume books, so I got to delve deep into my books again, which was great fun. Fortunately, it was one of my favourite eras, so I was quite familiar with it already. But I did a lot of research into. It was lovely that they were all based on. It was about real people, so I could actually look into the lives of the real people and see if there are any paintings or drawings about them, and gather that research, so that I could actually kind of have faces to put to them.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit more about the clothes of the time? So what were people wearing at that period of time?
It was lots of layers. So
we know.
You do, yes. So it was quite structured garments, so they needed a lot of support. Corsets, chemises, stockings, and then your overdresses. So each look had quite a bit of work go into it, because each outfit had a lot of components.
I think people have this idea of Baroque costume, if you like, being those sort of very structured corsets and huge skirts. Was that in your mind as you were designing, or were you going for something a little bit different?
No, actually, it wasn't in my mind, because that wasn't the class of people that we were dealing with. The problem with a lot of kind of historical costume conceptions is that a lot of the reference material we have is from paintings, and only the rich really could afford to get their painting taken. So there's this massive hole of all the other classes, and Purcell and his family weren't, super mega bucks. So they wouldn't have, had yards and yards and yards of silk and the great big get-ups. They were more toned down, and the feel of the production that we were doing was much simpler, and the characters the performers, I should say, were taking on and off characters. So the base costume needed to be much simpler so that things could be added and taken away.
So can can you tell us a little bit more about how historically accurate the costumes are for burying the dead?
They're pretty historically accurate. I tried to convey as much of the time as possible. So I used Janet Arnold patterns as a basis for a lot of the garments. She's a wonderful resource because she's taken real garments from museums and drawn out patterns from them, so you have the actual patterns that we used. So for the corset and chemises and petticoats and the nightshirt, those were all Janet Arnold patterns. And then again, the headpieces were based off of historical patterns.
Were there any bits that really weren't historically accurate at all?
So the only bit that really wasn't were the overdresses that the actresses wear, and that was purely from time constraints, quick change constraints, and budget constraints. So those were based on the overdresses that they would have worn, but they really wouldn't have worn anything quite so simple as that. I literally just had a long length of fabric that was pinned on the mannequin, some ties added to give the effect that of an overdress without actually all the complex sewing going into it.
And that was so useful, those quick costume changes that Jenni and I do on stage. Those kind of wrap-around, really simple costumes were absolutely perfect for what we wanted and meant that we could change character really quickly. Were there any other staging and movement considerations that you had to take into account when you were designing?
Well, the biggest movement consideration was that I was working with musicians, performers, so they had to be able to play their instruments and sing in the costumes. That was the most important thing. For the musicians, the sleeves had to not get in the way. For any sitting down, not digging in, and the most important thing, obviously, for the singers was that they could breathe and take a really good deep breath. So the corsets were designed with that in mind. Made sure in fittings that I got a lot of feedback from the performers of how it felt, how tightly it could be laced. So that was the biggest.
And what changes did you make to those corsets in particular? Just because I've worn corsets before and my goodness me, they are not so comfortable as yours. The corsets you made us were so comfy to sing in. So what changes did you make to the design to allow that to happen?
Well, fortunately, the style of 17th century corset that was actually very conducive to being adapted. So I put cording in instead of bones, so that it had more flex to it.
So is that like string for a complete layman who knows nothing? What does that mean?
It's like a soft twisted rope, quite narrow. So that was threaded. Lots of channels were sewn. That was threaded through, and that just gave it its stability and gave us its shape. But at the same time, allowed for the movement of the ribs, and also because it was a natural material, it would soften with the heat of the singer's body. So during a performance, it would give with the singer. So kind of working in symbiotic harmony with the singer.
That's so interesting.
Did you have to use any special techniques for these costumes? Were lots of them made by hand, for example, or what materials do you use?
A lot of natural materials were used, so linens and cottons, most. A little bit of silk for the overdress, just for that little touch of luxury. Silk wouldn't have been as easily accessible to kind of middle and lower classes, but again, with the rag trade, it would have been gradually passed down, so it's not completely impossible that actresses would have been wearing it. And also, actresses had there were the patrons of the theatre, so they would have been spoiling them. And in terms of in terms of techniques, the corset making is quite a particular technique. Fitting a corset takes a lot of physical strength to cinch it into place. The type of pleating that goes into the petticoats, because I think those ones weren't just gathered, they had a little bit of I wanted a flat front, because a lot of body goes into the back of the petticoat to stick out the hips and the bum, but they wanted like a nice flat stomach and cinched in waist, so they had a big wide pleat at the front, and then it was gathered around the back. And a lot of the other construction techniques are actually really transferable from modern construction techniques, and it's more the differences in the patterns. So it's actually really interesting kind of seeing the progression of garment construction in that respect.
And we talked a little bit about sort of the movement and staging considerations. You also did an amazing job of making particularly Jenni's costume really flexible, shall we say. We've already said that Jenni, bless her, was pregnant during the tour, and so what did you have to do to make that work, particularly with her skirt and her corset? How did you sort of design that flexibility within the costume?
Well, the wonderful thing about a corset is that it laces up at the back, so the laces can purely just be tied looser to accommodate a growing bump. Because women have been wearing corsets during pregnant for centuries, so it was done with this in mind. And in terms of the petticoat, I adapted hers to have an elastic waistband in, so that again, because it was tucked under, so the waistband was hidden, so you wouldn't see all the gathers, and it again could just expand with her.
Yeah. And that worked really well. You can't even tell from the film that she's pregnant, really. So
brilliant.
It's amazing. What was your inspiration for the costumes for this particular show? Because it has quite a particular look and sort of theme. So where did you get that inspiration from?
Well, the inspiration came from discussing with the director and with you guys, Trulio, about your vision for the piece and what you were trying to communicate and your take on this story. And what really became apparent was that you guys were that it was all about these Purcell and his illness and having these hallucinations and flashbacks over his life and key moments in his life, and that all the other performers were coming in and out, taking on characters and enacting these little skits and then taking off the characters and then becoming someone else. So it needed a strong that strong sense of transition, and also of sort of uncertain reality of what's real here, what isn't. So I wanted to create quite a dreamlike look, so I kept the base costumes for all of the performers quite muted, so natural tones and a slight hint of kind of dusky blue, so almost smoke-like in a way. And then the characters' costumes had much stronger colours. So the actresses were bright red and bright gold. Purcell's wife had this black, strong black headpiece, so that the audience could really tell that, okay, they're not just that, they're not performers anymore. They're not musicians anymore. This is a character, and they're interacting, but they're still not fully dressed up and not in a full costume, because they're essentially this wisp of smoke that Purcell is interacting with to reenact these memories.
That's such a lovely description. And we go in and out of the show is set in Purcell's bedroom, but it also becomes the theatre. It becomes sort of the theatre of his mind, if you like.
Exactly.
So how much of a transition between the sort of homely nature of being in a household of, as you say, middling wealth, to that theatrical, stage-like design? How did you deal with those two elements in your look and your theme?
Well, that was where the actresses really helped, because they were in these bright silks, and the dresses were made out of, I think it was about 4 meters or something of these bright silks. So it was these great swathes of colour. So you knew that you were transitioning into a realm of opulence, in a way. And they had more costume, just more physical costume than anyone in his room, really.
So how long did each costume take to make?
Oh, that's a good question. How long did they take to make? Hours and hours. It's hard to quantify.
Were they all different, or were some much faster and much easier?
Yes, Purcell himself was lovely and quick because he was just a nightshirt. So he was the easiest, actually. He only had the one garment. So I think the 2 singers took the longest because they had the most, and they had the corsets, and corsets are a lot of work. Hours and hours of sewing channels, probably a good 20 hours each.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Labour of love, girls. And then obviously with each one you've got fittings, and then you're making adjustments for the fittings, so that extends the time. But yeah, it's hard to pinpoint how long it was, but it was a long time.
Well, we were really, really grateful for the sort of adjustments and the interaction that we could have with you when we were discussing the costumes as well.
Good. It does make all the difference, having those clothes tailored to the person. It does make all the difference.
Absolutely. So we had lots of costume changes, as we've already mentioned in the show, and particular bits of costume that I certainly have never worked with before. So how did you learn, and how did you find teaching us how to tie cravats, for instance, or care for a wig, which I've never had responsibility for a wig before, and that was quite a scary challenge for me.
Well, the wigs were actually sourced from a lovely lady who works in the London theatres, that I found through putting a call out through on Facebook through the costume networking group. So in terms of caring for a wig, there was a little bit that I remembered myself from our wig course that was part of my degree, and then the rest was from asking her, actually, because the wig and makeup girls at the theatres from my time at E&O, they had a whole other skill set, so I knew that was out of my depth, so I outsourced the information there. The corset tying, again, that had been part of my degree. We had a great corset teacher, and the cravats. Historical reference books. It's amazing the amount of information that you can find just through the research that people have done and compiled. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Are you pleased with how the costumes turned out and how the show looked as a whole with the costumes as part of that?
Yes, absolutely. It was a really wonderful journey, really special. But that nothing beats that moment of completion, seeing everyone dressed up on stage. They don't need you anymore. I must admit, I felt slightly bereft that I was no longer needed. It's like sending your children off into the world. Oh, okay, you don't need me anymore. Fine. But all looking fabulous, and it all works, and that's the aim of the game, is that you don't need me and it all works, and it looks stunning. And yeah, it's a really, really special feeling of seeing that completion and all those weeks of hard work and collaboration coming to fruition.
Well, thank you so much. Your hard work definitely was so appreciated. Those costumes were the most comfortable period costumes I've ever worn, and survived 14 shows, and are still going strong. So hopefully we'll be able to reuse elements of those for future projects, which is really exciting.
Good. I'm very glad.
So obviously for this show you've been working on period costumes, which has been amazing and exciting, but what does your current life hold? What are you doing at the moment, and what are you designing?
Well, at the moment, actually, I'm still on maternity leave after having had my second child, but that ends at the end of the month, and I'm actually planning on having a break from dressmaking, just because in the current climate and with no childcare, it's very difficult to fit around the children. So what I'm doing instead is I'm focusing more on my other little business, which is called BobLovesLandy, which is where I make handmade adults leggings, maternity leggings, and then children's clothes from the offcuts. So I will be working on new designs for that, expanding my range, and it's something that was born out of my own desire to wear maternity clothes that were not black, because black is just not my colour. and again, and maternity clothes that were really comfortable and could be flexible once you'd had the baby as well, and you could carry on wearing them, so give them a bit more longevity. So,
well, I can certainly vouch for the fact that your leggings are definitely not black. You have the most amazing patterns for your BobLovesLandy leggings, and I love the fact that it's often like mum and baby match, which is just so adorable.
So very different from Burying the Dead, but still equally fun and easier to fit around the children at the moment. So
great, thank you, Hannah. It's been such a delight and a pleasure to talk to you. I found it so interesting. I've actually learnt a lot about the costumes that I didn't know before, and I probably should have paid more attention when you were making them, but there we are. I've learnt a lot now, and I'm so grateful, we all are, for the work and research that went into them, and into creating such amazing stage costumes that were really historically accurate, which is really what Churilo is all about. So thank you, Hannah.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It was lovely working with you.
In the next episode, we will chat to the lighting designer Natalie Rowland from Pitch Black Lighting.
Please subscribe so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching.